Amazing to have you all here. And it's the top of the hour, so I think we're going to get started now. We've got a very packed agenda today, so we're going to get moving quite quickly. Before we start, just as a few housekeeping announcements, this webinar is going to be recorded and posted to probably Vimeo. So that means that if you're not able to watch the whole thing, don't worry, you can watch back later. And with questions, if you'd like to ask a question, please add it to the chat. We'll do our best to be monitoring the Q&A, and we'll be answering some questions asynchronously throughout the talks. But we're not going to have a slot for Q&A after every speaker. Instead, we're going to have a Q&A at the very end of Solid World, where you'll be able to ask questions to all of the presenters here today. So if you've got questions, feel free to either post them while people are talking, we'll keep a record, or post them at the end. Either way, we'll get to them, and those questions that we don't have time for, we'll also point you towards some Matrix channels where you can ask them offline. Awesome. So today, I'm your host, I'm Jesse. I'm dialing in from the lovely city of Oxford, and we have a really exciting schedule. First, we'll get some updates from Louise, who's with the ODI, on what the ODI has been doing for Solid and our stewardship. And then we'll hear from Lawrence on updates from the Linked Web Storage Working Group. And then we'll hand over to Pavlik, who can give us some updates from the community group. After that, we're going to have our main presentations. Firstly, we'll hear from Noel de Martin on interoperable serendipity. I'm really excited to hear about that. And then we'll hear from Christoph and Tobias. And I'm going to hand straight over to Louise because we've got a fire alarm here.
Oh dear. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here again. I'm sure I've probably met some of you the last time. So I'm just going to give a quick overview on what's going on at the ODI. We've been extremely busy with Solid, so I thought I would break it down into these 5 sections. So looking at how we're operating at the moment, where we are with the governance model, some funding opportunities and some projects that we've secured recently, and then how our engagement is going in general. So Jesse, if I could have the next slide, please. Unless he's, there we go. So at the moment, what's happened is since we took over the stewardship of Solid last year, we've now integrated it as a stewarded initiative within the ODI. ODI is very used to actually stewarding initiatives. So what we've done is we've managed to embed it really well into our work at the ODI. Currently, I am overseeing the project, particularly working closely with Jesse and of course with Tim as well. And we've appointed Kweku as an ombudsperson, and he deals with anything that needs to be escalated to him. And then, of course, we have regular contact with Tim and Jesse around the technical roadmap as well. At this point in time, all the repos and the websites have been transferred to the ODI, and we are very actively in fundraising, and I will come to that separately. And today, we're actually hosting our first Solid World by ourselves, so that's good. And all I can say is that we had an amazing amount of support across all of the areas within the ODI, from our business development to the technology area, research, policy advocacy, and of course, the back office support around sort of compliance and finance, etc. So everybody is really pushing behind Solid at the ODI. So it's a really exciting time for us. So the next slide, please. So we've been working on governance, and we have actually published a proposed governance structure to the GitHub repository, and it's open for comment. Currently, we're stewarding as an initiative, as I mentioned, within the ODI. What does that kind of look like? Well, we've got it sitting in the discipline area, which is technology at the ODI, and we would normally then have a director of technology who would oversee that. That is a role that we will look to appoint as we are more successful with fundraising. For the time being, it's sort of a mixture of people that are providing that support. We've got Jesse very much active on the project lead side, and then, as I mentioned, we've got numerous team members across the ODI that are supporting the initiative. One of the areas that we have looked to design, we didn't want to sort of over-design it. So we have basically pushed out a design structure for an advisory committee, which will be a group of individuals that are appointed for overseeing Solid and advising on the strategic direction, decisions, and sustainability. And then we would have what we're calling a Solid Operations Advisory Group, which would have been formerly the Solid Project Group. And they basically are advising on the technical roadmap for Solid, along with sort of the governance of the GitHub repos and the website and the solidcommunity.net. And then after that, then I think it's a matter of the advisory committee coming together then to decide what other ad hoc groups we may require as we move forward. And that could be specifically driven by a use case or a particular sector that we want to work within. But I think the main objective for us right now is to try and get these two groups stood up, the advisory committee and the operations advisory group as well. So going forward, if we go to the next slide, the governance paper is open for consultation until the 28th of February. So that's like the end of this week, Friday, I think. So please do go and have a look and post any comments that you may have. And then we will look to take those comments on board and edit as might be required. And then our objective is then to basically finalize that governance structure around mid to late March, and making sure that we make available a response to the comments that have been added. The next move from there will then be to establish these committees and groups. So the advisory group, when you have a look at the paper on GitHub, you will see there's some roles that are specified, but there's many roles that need to be recruited for that group. We will run that recruitment process in an open way, and we will make available during this week the recruitment, sort of how we are proposing to run that open recruitment process. And then the Solid Operations Advisory Group, again, will also be open, but it will be through self-nomination and then voting from the community for the roles within that group. But yeah, please go and have a look at the governance paper, and we would very much welcome your support and your comments so that we make the best possible governance structure going forward. So on to the next page, which I believe is funding. So some good news. We were entered into the Proton Foundation Lifetime Fundraiser Award over the Christmas period. And we were successful in securing a $70,000 investment, which of course we are going to put towards the sustainability and the stewardship of Solid at the ODI. So that's been good news. We are in advanced conversations at the moment, and we have presented Solid to google.org, which is the foundation side, along with McGovern Foundation. Now, ODI has a relationship with McGovern Foundation that goes back many years. So along with Solid, we also would have presented our other research, particularly around data-centric AI. I would say that there was a good response to the presentation to McGovern, and there was a very strong response to the presentation that we made to google.org as well. We expect that we'll get some news probably in the next 2 to 4 weeks. And we're hoping then that that will give us some really, really solid funding, excuse the pun, to support the work that we really, really want to get on and do and move things forward. On the project side, we have recently signed a 3-year partnership with the London Stock Exchange. So this is more of a sort of commercial piece of work. They are particularly committed to open source. They're very interested in what Solid can do for the London Stock Exchange. And currently what we're looking at is some use cases. They haven't been qualified yet. And there's 5 listed on the screen. We are particularly keen for anybody who's interested in the 5th one there to volunteer mentoring. Please let us know and reach out to solid@theodi.org, because we're going to be working on UX and DX of Solid with an internal hackathon with the London Stock Exchange. I know there's lots of people on the call, so it's probably a big ask, but at the moment we have not made an official announcement about the London Stock Exchange. We normally would announce our partnership, but that is likely not to happen until Q3. at the request of the London Stock Exchange, because they want to be able to define the use cases, etc., before they go out with that announcement. But an exciting application there. On the engagement side, we continue to have really strong interest from government at ministerial level. We've also made sure that Solid is name checked and is part of the Data Use and Access Bill and a number of consultations that we've been involved in. Myself and Jesse and Lawrence and Pierre-Antoine actually presented at the State of Open conference a couple of weeks ago now. And we've had some really good discussions with group in Solid Australia, looking at the viability of setting up a regional chapter. But it's early days at the moment, and we are looking forward to taking those discussions forward. We've had a huge amount of incoming requests for use cases, so it's been really beneficial for me today to spend some time here with Solid Lab. And there's so much overlap in the use cases that I heard about today. So actually trying to join all those things up so that we're not all reinventing the wheel in different territories has been really refreshing to see that. On the next slide, just to remind everybody that the Solid Symposium is coming up in April. I believe it's at Leiden. So the registrations are now open. We do have a keynote at that event, so I'm hoping to be there to do that. We will present the final governance model at that event, and I think we'll also be looking at what the technical roadmap would look like too. So I'm going to stop there. Hopefully I did that in 5 minutes, Jesse.
Amazing. Thanks, Louise. Now we'll hand over to Lawrence to hear some updates from the Linked Web Storage Group.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello from whatever time zone you are in right now. My name is Lawrence Bakker. I work as a chair with the Linked Web Storage Working Group. I represent Digitaal Vlaanderen, the Flemish government, also in the working group. We were chartered as a W3C working group last September, lasting until September 2026, with the mission of continuing the work from the Solid community and like-minded communities in enabling the development of web applications where data storage, authentication, access control, and application providers can all be loosely coupled. So continuing on the mission of what Solid started a couple of years ago. Our working group got started in September. We're focused on delivering a couple of output documents, one of which will be a linked web storage protocol at the recommendation level, which should be a sort of successor to the current Solid protocol being defined by the Solid community group. It will derive from that as an input document, but it will also look at more broader input from the community of personal data spaces at large. In addition to that, we will also be publishing a test suite and an implementation report, which is mandatory under the W3C process and under our charter. And we will be working on threat modeling for the linked web storage protocol. Our meetings with the working group are every Monday, every week at 3 p.m. UTC. They are unfortunately W3C member only. That's the process of a working group whereby we meet within the W3C membership. Membership, of course, is open to any organization wanting to join. Individuals willing to join can apply for in an invited expert role. More information on this can be found at the W3C website, or contact details can also be found on our homepage. Currently, ongoing work within our linked web storage working group is on a use cases and requirements document, which is going to be a working group note that we'll be probably publishing a first draft on somewhere in March or April. We are very much inviting and looking forward to getting input from the community at large. So even though some parts of our working group and our operations as a working group are members only, we very much do welcome input, especially in these use cases and requirements, from any member of the broader Solid community and also other communities involved in the problem space of personal data spaces. And so in terms of upcoming work at the level of the working group, we're hoping to start the actual linked web storage protocol work somewhere around March, so next month, where we're still looking for editors to take the lead in getting started with that very important protocol document, our recommendation level output of this working group. So we've seen some very strong input on our use cases and requirements document, but we were very much still welcoming the community to give input through GitHub issues. The GitHub issues are also linked in the Zoom chat here. There's a template for anyone willing to submit their own use cases or requirements to the group. Well, it will allow us to write a better spec ultimately, and to make sure that we build a better web for everyone. So with that, I would very much like to give it back to Jesse and to Pavlik.
Amazing, exciting stuff. Thank you so much, Lawrence. Pavlik, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elf Pavlik. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Solid community group, together with Mikhail and Hadrian. We'll be rotating here as well, so we'll be trying every Solid World to share a little update from the community group. I will post the link to the community group in the chat after my short presentation. There are few collaboration spaces that we are using. Possibly we need to reconcile some of them, but at this moment, the participation is open. So for community groups, you do not have to be a W3C member. Like, you just need to join the community group, agree for the CLA, and you can just participate. So it's very open for collaboration. It's an incubation space. And currently we use various GitHub repositories. So currently each report, in most cases has its own repository. There are issues, discussions, it's open, it's public, everyone can participate, provide feedback, opinions. We have multiple matrix chat rooms, which are also open to the public. There is a public mailing list, which you can find from the homepage of the Solid community group. There is an online forum, currently it's a discourse. Again, everyone can participate, provide opinions and feedback. And also community group has a calendar, it's hosted by W3C, and you can subscribe to the calendar feed and add it to your calendar so you will not miss any upcoming events. And thank you, Jesse, for posting the links. Yeah, that's different. So we have a weekly plenary meeting on Wednesdays. Twice a month, there's a Solid practitioners meeting. So the community group, like, main focus, it's on drafting reports, technical reports, which are, again, not official specifications. There are community group reports which can be submitted as a incubated input for the working group, as we did for the Solid protocol, passing it as an input to the working group. Practitioners, it's more focused on community, or on people who use Solid, implement Solid, have specific use cases they would like to, or evaluate feasibility of using Solid. So those meetings are first and second Thursday. You can see, again, I recommend subscribing to the calendar or checking the calendar, which you can find again from the homepage of the community group. And then, like, twice a month, we are scheduling what we call special topic meetings, which are meetings focused on very specific topic. That also happen in practitioners, but also CG has a special topic meeting. So actually tomorrow there will be meeting focusing on shaped repositories, and we are planning to schedule for the next month, probably first or second week of next month, a meeting about application launchers, because there are more activities, more developments in those fields. And again, usually it's community driven. So if someone has something that they develop, they want to share, they want to clarify some questions about it, it's very open for everyone to propose a special topic meeting. And then usually we discuss it once or twice during the weekly meeting, and then they schedule and dedicate one meeting for an hour or two, depends on what's needed. And we also try to reach out to an external experts. So that's why we also scheduled this one to accommodate. There were a few meetings with people from Australia that will focus on end-to-end encryption. They were meeting about local first approach. There was recently a meeting about interop with the ActivityPub, which I will mention later. So again, it's very open for people to propose. And I would like to invite everyone interested to start collaborating, join the community group, and again, engage in one of those collaboration spaces. The mentioned reports you can find on this link, which there's many different reports. Some of them have been submitted as inputs for the working group. Some, like the Solid protocol, it's already there, and other inputs are potential inputs, which depends on the working group progress. Also, community group is collaborating with ODI on hosting a default Solid pod that people can create their storages pods and have accounts over there. It's solidcommunity.net. And recently it has been migrated from Node Solid Server to Community Solid Server, which is, they're both JavaScript, TypeScript implementations. And majority of this work was done by Alan, Mikiel, and Jesse. So kudos to them for migrating that. And can we go to the next slide, please? And now, very quickly, because I have only a few minutes, give a quick overview about the recent work. As I mentioned, we are now looking into interop with ActivityPub, so the Fediverse. There have been talk about agentic link data. So with the rise of AIs, bots, autonomous agents, people would like to discuss those topics, and there's already ongoing conversations. Possibly it may become a work item. We've been talking about security considerations. There is a draft report for that. It needs a lot of work, and probably we will have to coordinate with the working group the threats, security threat model. There have been conversations about authorizing applications. So again, since people can use, in most cases, the application they choose to use, there's a topic of how they can use it in a responsible way, and only authorized application to access the data application needs to access for its operation. So it's also ongoing discussion. And one of the main focuses in community group, since we started handing out the reports to the working group, it's the interop across data domains. And here we can talk about, again, that's my interpretation. It's not official community group categorization, about horizontal data domains, which is something very generic, like contacts, which again relates to the social graph. It's important when we talk about sharing data, defining access policies. It's often based on the social graph, the groups, organizations, and individuals that we collaborate with, share data with. So that's very common data domain. We have some work done on chat and discussions. It's the next two are still not work items, but I think it's a good example of this kind of horizontal data domain, when we can talk about calendars and geodata, like locations. And then we have something we can kind of loosely call more vertical. And one of the recent work items proposed by Maxime is enterprise resource planning, ERP. There's an early draft for that. Again, whoever's interested, please join the collaboration. There have been many discussions about the healthcare. Last practitioners meeting was focused, not last, the first one this month was focused on that. There's also some work around project management, so projects, tasks, issues. We all work on projects, collaborate, so that's quite tracking issues, for example, and then organizing milestones. That's a very common thing that we all can test ourselves as we work on that. And one of the next practitioners meetings will be on transportation. So those last three are not official work items, but I think they are good examples of those kind of more vertical data domains. And again, the horizontal ones apply to all three of those, because in any of those domains, people work with contacts, there are discussions, chat, meetings, calendars, often locations. So like one of the beauty of linked data, that it should give a solid foundation, again, sorry for the pun, to have those data domains on one side, like being developed in somehow independent way, but at the same time have a like very smooth way of working across those data domains. And again, like sometimes even people talk about diagonal data domains, and I think one of the examples here could be customer relationship management, or sometimes people talk about vendor relationship management. And again, one can think of it as peer relationship management, but in all of those domains, there's an aspect of that. And often it's not easy to just draw a hard line. So this will be one of the big focuses for the community group. And if you are interested, if any of those horizontal, vertical, diagonal, it doesn't matter, data domains, and you would like to see how Solid can apply, you have some ideas, proposals, you'd like to participate, again, please join community group, join one of the collaboration spaces, mailing list forum, matrix chat, and just participate with us with developing the Solid. Again, it's an incubation space, so it's much more open for different ideas, different approaches, and the focus often goes where the participation goes. So if you can mobilize people and connect with people, and there's an interest in some topic, it's a perfect space to explore it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Lots of exciting things happening in the community group. Amazing. Next, we're going to hear from Noel de Martin, who's been doing lots of amazing things with Solid. He's been contributing to Solid OS for many years and has built a number of Solid applications, including Umai, which is a recipe manager. And he's going to give a talk on interoperable serendipity. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to you, Noel.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's go. Okay, so yeah, hello, my name is Noel. And in case you haven't tried Solid or you don't know about any apps, I have made a few. Maybe you have already seen them and you can use them if you want to see how Solid works, if you have never used it. But actually, today I'm not going to talk about my apps. I'm going to talk about something called interoperable serendipity. Maybe for some of you, this is you don't know what this means or how this is related with Solid. But before we get into that, there is something else I wanted to ask. And it is when you look at this picture, what do you see? Maybe some of you are seeing a duck, or maybe some others you are seeing a rabbit. Well, the thing about this image is that there is no right answer. It's both a duck and a rabbit. And I see a similar thing happen when I ask people why they are using Solid, or they tell me why they are interested in Solid. For example, for some people, it's for privacy. They care about privacy and they see in Solid a solution to their problems. Also about owning their data, which is closely related with privacy. But maybe you are working on Solid or you want to learn more about it because you want to own your network. Like maybe for you, the problem when you have to switch applications is not losing your data or not having access to it, but you have to leave behind all your connections, right? This is also something that could be solved with Solid. But there is also something else I learned more recently that is called interoperability. And I'm sure there are many other reasons that I haven't mentioned of why people may be interested in Solid. But I want to make the case that for me, at least, interoperability is the most important property. At the beginning, I started learning about Solid and was interested because of the privacy angle, right? But later on, as I have been spending more time in the community and working with Solid itself, I have realized that actually, if we don't have interoperability, everything else is kind of pointless. And I want to share a quote from a presentation by Angelo Beltens, where he mentioned that there is actually no killer app with Solid. And actually, we don't want a killer app. What we want is an ecosystem of interoperable apps, applications that work together properly. And this is what actually can show what Solid is for and could fulfill the potential of Solid. In case you don't know what interoperability means, the basic definition is the characteristic of a product or system to work with other products of systems. This is a bit abstract, so I will share some specific examples. For example, if you think about email, it's a good example of interoperability because there are you can use different email providers and in different domains, and you can talk with anybody who is using the email protocol. So maybe you have a Gmail account, but you can talk with anyone that has an email, even if they are self-hosting it or whatever. So email is a good example of interoperability in practice. We also have RSS. For example, if you want to subscribe to a podcast, you can use many applications, or you can even code your own. And it's an ecosystem where different applications work together and work properly. And maybe the best example of interoperability that we have is the web itself. Users expect that if they visit a website, it should work with any browser. And that's actually something important. For me, interoperability, it's not only saying that a product is implementing a protocol, it's also the expectation from the user. For example, for users, if you are using an email account and you see that you cannot communicate with other people, for you, this will not be interoperable. So it's also important to have into account the expectation of working together, right? And right now, I have put some examples of interoperability, but I think Solid is very interesting because if everything works properly and we start using Solid more and more, actually, we're going to have an ecosystem where everything is interoperable. No, we're not just going to have some verticals like email, RSS, or whatever. The point is that using Solid, you will just have apps and applications will use your data. And this can also create some situations where you combine data from different contexts. So this is why I think this could be the answer for, this could show the potential of Solid. But actually, when we think about interoperability, we think about it in black and white, like something is interoperable or it isn't. But the reality is that there is a gradient. Some things are more interoperable than others, right? And to see an example of this, we can look at a taxonomy that Cory Doctorow defined. For example, he said that the first level of interoperability is indifferent interoperability. This is what we find in the real world. For example, if you have a drum kit and you are going to buy some drumsticks, you don't have to think about what is the brand of your drum and your drumsticks so that they work together. You know that any of them is going to work. And beyond that, even things that are not engineered to work together, they can. For example, if you are playing a guitar and you don't have a guitar pick, you can use a coin as a pick and it's going to work. So this is the highest level of interoperability. But when we start looking at other examples, in particular in technology, for example, we see a lot of cooperative interoperability. This is what Solid is trying to achieve. And this means basically that things work together because they are designed to work together. But this is not as good as indifferent because, for example, if you are using the Solid protocol, but somebody else is using another protocol, even if it's cooperative and they are making it in a way that can be used together, it's not going to work with your thing without some effort. So that's why cooperative interoperability is not as good as indifferent, but it's also in the good direction. But finally, we have adversarial interoperability. This would be, for example, what Facebook or some big tech companies are doing, that they go out of their way to make things not interoperable. So even if you are using a website and it would be very easy for them to give you a way to export your data, they try to avoid it. So that is the worst type of interoperability we can have, which is almost none, right? But even at this level, we can still go deeper and see more examples, and everything is not black and white still. So for example, if we look between cooperative and adversarial, we have Facebook API. I just said that Facebook, they are using adversarial interoperability, but they have some features where they actually have cooperative interoperability. And that is what they expose through their API. And also inside of cooperative interoperability, even if you are using Solid, it could be within this range. It's not something black and white. And for me, I would argue that the best cooperative interoperability you can achieve is called interoperable serendipity. And if you get there, you are very close to indifferent interoperability. So in this presentation, I'm going to look at how we can get from the far edge of the cooperative interoperability to the interoperable serendipity. And for that, I have made 4 levels of interoperability. And the first one, I call it obfuscated interoperability. And we can look at that looking at an example. So this is a screenshot of my first Solid application, which is called Solid Focus. And it's a very simple task manager. And it has some things to it. So for example, it's using the Solid protocol. If you have a Solid pod, it could be self-hosted in your home, or it could be using from a provider like solidcommunity.net, and it should work. So in that sense, it's interoperable. However, there are some things that are not perfect. For example, it doesn't register the data location. So if you are using this application and then you use another task manager, it's very unlikely that you will see your data there, because since my application hasn't registered the location of the data, the other application will not be able to find where the data is. So this is something that could be improved. Also, it's using a very unconventional data schema. Since this was my first Solid application and I hadn't worked with the semantic web in the past, I didn't know a lot about how to model data, right? So I ended up using different vocabularies, and not everything is so intuitive as it should be. I don't think I am using the data properly. And even beyond that, this is not something I'm doing in my application, but there is nothing in Solid preventing you from doing this. You could be using a property that is supposed to be human readable, a string of text, but you can use that as a JSON encoded object, and you can drive your whole application like this. So even though it will work and people will be able to use Solid with your application, in my opinion, this will be the worst type of cooperative interoperability, right? So that's what I call obfuscated interoperability. And I call it obfuscated because even though it's using an open protocol, it's very difficult for someone to make an application that is interoperable with yours. And probably if someone wants to make an application today that interoperates with my Solid app, they would have to look in their source code. So that is not the best solution that we have. So that is for me the lowest level of cooperative interoperability. The next level, I call it intentional interoperability. For this case, we are going to look actually at the Focus version 2. So this is the same application I built some years ago that I started rebuilding it from scratch, now that I know more about Solid. So it still uses Solid to connect, so this is the same thing as before. But this time, I am using something called the type index to register the location of the data. So other applications should be able to find the data in the Solid pod. And also, I am using more conventional data schemas. I am putting conventional here in quotes because that's conventional from my point of view. But as you will find, if you start working with Solid and you dig more into this ecosystem, there is always something different with vocabularies. Like maybe for you, one data schema is very obvious, but then you find another application that is using another vocabulary because maybe they are not doing exactly the same thing that you do, etc. So I think at this point, it's on a best effort basis. If you use the vocabularies that you are using properly, you are doing it well, but there are still some limits there. So with all these checks, then I think we can have intentional interoperability. That means that two applications can be interoperable among them if you are intentional about it, but it doesn't go as low as obfuscated, because I believe it would be possible for other applications to interoperate without looking at the source code. Just looking at the data itself and which vocabularies it is using, and using best practices, it should be possible for other applications to interoperate. And at this point, since we have self-describing data, the data itself is pointing to the vocabularies, and we are using the Solid protocol, I think we have a very good case for interoperability. So in this case, it would be similar to the Facebook API, but the applications will have an API out of the box without the developers having to do anything specific for that. So I think this is something very powerful that we should take advantage of in the Solid ecosystem. And yeah, the next level then, I call it lens-based interoperability. And the thing here is that imagine we have two developers, Alice and Bob. And as we know, developers only know how to do task managers. So each of them makes a task manager, but they use different vocabularies. As I mentioned, it's not always super obvious which one to use. So they are using two vocabularies, and they are using the vocabulary correctly. They are also using the type index, etc. But the applications are not going to be interoperable because they are different. However, we as humans, or as developers who understand RDF, we can look at these files and we can see that they actually have the same structure. So it would be easy for us to make a mapping and say, okay, this field is this field, etc. Right? So This actually is something that can be programmed as well. There is this project called Project Cambria that talks about how you can do this kind of mappings between schemas and use them at runtime to translate the data itself. Cambria is not specific to RDF, but I think we can use these similar ideas to achieve the same results. And actually, in RDF in particular, we have this concept of shapes that is already well positioned to apply this idea of lenses as well. So I think if we combine shapes with lenses, we can achieve a much better compatibility. And that's what I call lens-based interoperability, because it's better than intentional, because you only have to define your lens. You don't have to refactor your whole application to work with the other one. So this is what I would call lens-based. However, we are still not, this is not the best possible scenario, because you have to define the lens. There is still something you have to do. For me, the ideal situation would be what I call interoperable serendipity. And what do I mean with that? It has nothing to do with the movie, although that's what you may think about this word. At least that's what I did at the beginning. But for me, what I mean with that is that interoperable serendipity happens when apps built by different developers work together without explicit coordination. So this can seem a bit far-fetched, but it has already happened sometimes. For example, I made my application MediaKraken, and I presented it here some years ago as well. And sometime after, there was another application that also worked with movies called SolidFlix. And actually, I tested, and it seems like these applications are actually interoperable out of the box. And I know they were familiar with my application, but I doubt they looked at my source code, because it's not 100% interoperable. But because they are using the same vocabulary, which is schema.org, the applications kind of work together out of the box. So this is, for me, a good example of interoperable serendipity, and this is what I would like to see more in the ecosystem, and what I think would show the true power of Solid. So the question still remains, how can we make that two developers who don't know about each other create applications that are interoperable? Okay, I have some ideas. For example, one of them would be to connect your application to a Lens repository. This means that even if a new application appears in the future, since you are connected to the repository, the application could download the lenses and interoperate with other applications without having to change any code. And this is not limited to only one repository. You could connect to multiple repositories, or even allow users to configure their own repositories. So this kind of approach would be one step towards interoperable serendipity. There are actually some initiatives going in this direction, even though they are not specific to lenses, but they are talking about shapes. So I think it would be feasible to create lenses from these shapes. And actually, if you are interested in this, you can join tomorrow's meeting, which Public already mentioned, where we are going to talk about shape repositories. So hopefully we can improve this kind of situation there. Also, there are other solutions that we can find. For example, we can use browser extensions. There are already some extensions that allow you defining some selectors to parse data from a website. So for example, here you can see how I can get all the tasks on a website. And then inside of each task, I can define each of the fields, like the name, the completion, etc. And once you have defined all these CSS selectors, you can extract the data. So doing this kind of thing, I think it would be possible to generate a lens as well, so that users that don't know how to write RDF or lenses, they could still use something to generate translations and make the applications compatible. You can try this website called webscrapper.io, which also does nothing specific to RDF, but you can see the type of UX you would have to create this thing, because it allows you to select parts of a website and extract some data. So I think the experience could be very similar. And also, obviously, we cannot have a presentation today without mentioning AI. So one solution to this problem could also be to use AI. So imagine that you use both applications, Alice and Bobs, and you create one task in each application. And if you had an AI installed in your pod that works for you, you could use this UI to generate a lens automatically. Since it has seen the example of the two applications, the two tasks, it could create the lens to translate among them. And in case you are not familiar with this concept of a personal AI, I suggest that you check out this writing by Tim Berners-Lee, and he also talked about it at the We Are Developers World Congress. So the idea here is that you would have an AI that is in your pod and it doesn't reach outside of your pod. So all the data is private and you can use it with sensitive data as well. So yeah, that's the basic idea. So I have given you some ideas of how we could reach interoperable serendipity, but I'm sure there are more I'm not thinking about. The point is that we have this in mind and we try to achieve it. So hopefully I have convinced you of how important this is for Solid and to achieve a better app ecosystem in general. And if you have any ideas or any comments about this, let me know. As for me, I am trying to work on this in my applications, and you are free to follow my work if you are interested. And here are some links that I have already mentioned in the presentation. And if you want to look at my work, this is my website, and I'm also online in different social networks. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noel. What an amazing and inspiring and insightful presentation. Yes, lots of hand claps coming from the crowd. Now we hand over to Tobias and Christoph to hear about their Mandat project, and I will let them introduce that in more detail. Excited to hear about it.
So thanks, Jesse. Today we want to talk about the Mandat project, Mandat in German, where we build B2B data ecosystems with Solid. We are together in this project together with DATEV and FIU, which is a consortium that may contain some familiar faces if you work with knowledge graphs and linked data. So we have Andreas Hart was one of the PIs, the organizer of the first Solid Symposium in Nuremberg. We have Andreas Both, who served as head of research at DATEV for this project, also a familiar face to Semantic Web folks. Maybe a word on the company, which may lead to an understanding of the use case a bit more. It's an organization founded in the 1960s as the Cooperative of German Tax Advisors, hence the focus on the German market. They process the payslips, for instance, of the significant share of the German population. That's why they have a lot of data security and a lot of barbed wire around their computing centers. So in Germany, it's a big player in the IT landscape, not so much known outside. Lastly, we have me from KIT. I serve as interim professor for web science there, and I was chair of a cost action on distributed knowledge graphs, so topics around Solid and the likes. I will give this presentation together with Christoph, who is a PhD candidate in my team. Yeah, let's get started. So next slide. So in this research project, what we did is we set out to develop methods and components for open data-driven data ecosystems based on open web standards. And because this DATEV company works a lot with SMEs, and we have a lot of SMEs in Germany, data sovereignty is core. So the organizations want to manage the data themselves. What we also aim for, because we want to apply the general methods and develop general methods, we are focused on reusability for the methods that we work on in this project. For data fiduciaries, as the DATEV is one, and the SMEs as their indirect customers. And lastly, of course, working in a B2B context, and you will see the use case upcoming, we have to comply with technical, legal, and organizational requirements from the B2B landscape. So next slide, please. So why did we do that project? Well, obviously, because we weren't satisfied with the state of the art in web applications when we want to have digital collaboration of various players in a business ecosystem, like SMEs, their advisors, their auditors, their banks, their financial services team. And because we are working with sensitive company data security is an issue. And at the end of the day, we want to have traceability in order to hold people accountable for the data that they share. And if we look at web applications, we see that there's a lot of lock-in of users. into applications that not only locks them into certain applications, but also their variations of security and traceability that the service provider offers. And if you work for all tax advisors of a country, well, you need to integrate a lot of third-party components, and that also gives a high cost, not just on the user side, but also on the system provider side. So what we want to achieve, we want to have high flexibilities for users and providers, and yeah, work for data sovereignty, because the SMEs and so on, they're sometimes a bit paranoid. So data sovereignty is key, and we want to facilitate interoperability across organizations, and Noel has just done a great pitch for that. So let me give you a small example. So we have a business process, say loan approval, where we have an application that does due diligence based on data. And this data can also be useful in other processes. For instance, we have the due diligence is based on at the end of the due diligence, we get a loan, and this loan may be part of the bottom line of the bank. So we have another application that composes the balance sheet of the bank at the end of the financial year. So the same data is useful again. And lastly, on the third side, we have another business process where the same data or the same application for due diligence works on other data for continuous monitoring of loans and how the financial performance of the bank's customers are. Again, same application, different data this time. And you can just scale this up because you have identities in all these systems. They may come from different identity providers managed by different organizations. So we want to facilitate these kinds of data ecosystems and data value chains and build data spaces in this style. So next slide, please. So let's have a look at our specific use case that we tackled in this project. Well, we have in the middle, we have a small medium enterprise where there's Tom working, and he has been tasked to apply for a loan for the company with a bank. And the bank cannot do that alone. Maybe start the animation, please. So the bank wants to do due diligence, as already mentioned. And for this due diligence, the bank asks the SME for some documentation like business reports. And the SME doesn't have the capacity to do that themselves. They ask their tax advisor to prepare the business reports. They then get fed back to the SME and forwarded to the bank. And this whole process should be streamlined and digitized, and with all the necessary rights and so on. And we are not looking just at one bank. We can also look at the market of banks where different banks register credit offers and the SME searches for credit offers. So we build a value chain, an ecosystem of cooperating organizations. So that's the use case. We have to tackle a few technical challenges here. Obviously, data is stored somewhere. Some data is stored at the tax advisor. Some intermediary data needs to be stored at the SME, and the necessary rights need to be granted to the specific roles and to the specific people in the organizations. And that's not about the data access granting, but also we need to have a traceability when it comes to the delegation of rights in the organization. So the CEO of the small enterprise where Tom is working needs to delegate the right to give business reports to a bank. Not every employee should have this right in order to keep the risk surface low, and not all the financial data of the SME can be disclosed. So we need a way of delegating rights within an organization. And lastly, as data flows here from the tax advisor via the employee to the bank, we need something that we call data provisioning chain, where then if the data flows from right to left, the SME can, for instance, black out certain parts or filter according to their needs, because the bank may not need to see, for instance, the names on the payslip lists that the company produces. So these are the challenges that, the technical challenges that we addressed in this project. And now when we want to talk about how we did that, obviously we are here to talk about Solid. So we found a nice match in Solid with technologies for protocols for data transport, data interface, authorization, authentication, and identification, on which we build our use case. And how we exactly did that, that will be now subject of Christoph's part of the presentation. So over to you, Christoph.
Yeah, thank you, Tobias, for the introduction. So how do we actually solve these problems? Let's just go one by one and look at how we tackled these problems in our project. So for the first problem, data storage, the problem itself is creating a data access interface and enabling data transfer, right? We need a place to store our data. And the solution here is quite easy, actually, because we can take a solution off the shelf. There is the Solid Pod, which is a RESTful web server with access control that belongs to some user organization agent where they can store and manage their data. And there are implementations out there, for example, the Community Solid server. So we can just grab open source software and have a solution for our first problem. Quite nice. So, and this RESTful web server adheres to the Solid protocol. And this is the theme that we want to emphasize throughout our solution landscape for the different problems. All the solutions use the same interfaces, the same mechanisms provided by the Solid protocol. So now we can store data, for example, business reports. Now we need to be able to grant access to these business reports. So second problem, data access granting for specific purposes. We want to be in control. So when, for example, Tom here works for the small medium enterprise, uses a business application, the business application should only operate on the enterprise's data. It should not manage access rights. That would be the task of what we call the authorization app. Only the authorization app should be able to set access rights. If you're familiar with Solid, you may know the Solid application interoperability spec. This sounds familiar because it is. We also read that spec, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. Not everything is gold, but this solution is based on this idea. So when Tom uses our business application, the business application will prompt him from the business process he is going through. Well, at this point, dear Tom, you must grant access to whomever, I don't know, because the business app doesn't really know. But there must be access granted for this business process. And there will be a redirect to the authorization app, where then all the details are displayed and Tom can actually grant access to data, to the business reports, for example. And note that here you could also have a dual control, that two persons need to grant access to a specific piece of data such that then the access right is actually set. So, but how does Tom now have the right to give the data away, basically? Because the business reports are the enterprises, right? This is our third problem, internal rights delegation. The small medium enterprise delegates rights to certain actions to Tom. So there is a principal and the delegate. And this delegation of rights happens in a policy. You could think of an ODRL policy or whatever language you prefer. We looked at ODRL. So when Tom, the employee, wants to execute an action, for example, apply for a loan or similar, then it is not Tom that sends the HTTP request directly to the bank, but instead Tom sends this request to the rights delegation proxy. Tom would like to initiate such an action on behalf of the small medium enterprise. And only if the policy as defined by the principal allows for the action, only then this action to apply for a loan is executed to the bank, to the affiliate. This means that all the transactions of the what Tom wants to do are traceable. They are all loggable. They are all logged, even the ones that Tom is not allowed to do by policy. And what is more, it is not only that the request is proxy to the bank, but actually the request is taken over such that the proxy itself, as the small medium enterprise, issues the request here. So the identity of Tom is not necessarily revealed, right? So to the bank, it seems that the small medium enterprise applied for a loan. The bank does not know that Tom initiated the request. This brings us to our fourth problem, data provision chains. We need to provide data to a third party. In our case, it's the business reports. The business reports of the small medium enterprise are created by the tax advisor. The reports are also stored at the tax advisor's pod, and only provision on the fly upon request by the bank, or Lisa in this case, the bank's employee, only then they are provided. So there is no copy, hard copy on the small medium enterprise side, but there's only a virtual resource. So for this, there is a URI generated at the small medium enterprise pod to point to the original business report at the tax advisors. Upon request, if the policy usage policy for the business reports allows it, only then data is fetched dynamically and forwarded on demand. So these were our four problems. If you want to read more about them, we linked all our publications on the slides, and we actually can see them working together like this. We have a business application and the authorization application. Business application is only doing the business process. Authorization application is doing the access rights. Internal rights delegation is done by the rights delegation proxy. Data provision chains by the data provision proxy. And the pod is the data storage. So everything should work together fine, which it also does, because we can piece it all together and implement our business process, our loan approval or credit, enterprise credit use case. And if you're really interested in all the nitty-gritty details, you can find them here in these publications for you to get a grasp of how this works. So we will also have probably a solid practitioners meeting if people are interested in how the details work, and maybe there we can have a live demo. Here I want to give you a preview of how our applications look. So here you can see the bank's demand processor application. You see for this demo we serve them on localhost, and you see, like usual, logged in into a Solid application, Lisa is logged in. However, they act on behalf of the bank. So here we see the organizational rights problem. Then the demands for a loan are all stored on the bank's pod. So the application accesses the bank's pod. This demand was sent by the small medium enterprise, which was initiated by Tom, but the bank doesn't know that. It only knows the small medium enterprise sent this demand. And what Lisa, the bank, will do now is request business data, business reports from the applicant to assess the creditworthiness. So here, an access request is sent to the small medium enterprise. When this request is received at the enterprise, the authorization app comes in handy because here access needs to be set. Similar to Lisa, here Tom, the employee of the small medium enterprise, is logged in. So also at this organization, we have the rights delegation problem. Then data granting, purpose-specific access granting. Each access request should link a purpose. We have the data requester and for whom access should be set. These may be different. And then additional information and which technical aspects are actually meant here. So here we see which shape the data is that was requested and what access modes are requested on the data in the pod. Asterix, here the business reports are not actually stored at the small medium enterprises pod, but by the in the pod of the tax advisor. So here the data will be silently then provided via the data provision chain. How are we doing on time? Great. So this is a sneak peek. If you're interested, please let us know. Then we will maybe get involved with the Solid practitioners if you want to see this really happening or have any more questions on the details. So if you're interested in more, shoot us an email, get in touch if you want to build something similar. If you run into the same problems as we did in our research project, having all these problems, then get in touch. We love to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to give it back to Jesse.
Thank you, Tobias and Christoph. That was a really insightful talk and very, very detailed. So thank you so much for your presentation. I'll start off with a question for you since you're already live.
Sure.
Which is, in this kind of enterprise scenario, one thing that's really important is to strongly identify the people that you're working with. So how do you manage identity and confirm identity within this project, if at all?
Yes. So in general, we want to be true to Solid fashion and allow for anyone can bring anyone's ID, right? But this doesn't always work in the corporate setting. In our case, the identity provider was run by Datev, right? So Datev is providing organizational IDs as Datev is doing anyways in their daily business. And for the employees side in our research project, we actually allowed for the employees bringing their own. So in one slide for the delegation proxy, for example, we made sure to include tom.solidcommunity.net because it really doesn't matter which web ID is defined in the policy. Of course, in the governance model, it should not be any old web ID, but in theory, you can bring your own. And this is something that we wanted to make sure in our components and methods to not lock in how you do things based on a governance model, but just say, you need a web ID, which one? Oh, this is maybe based on your use case because your use case brings its own governance model. We don't want to prescribe that. We just give the technical means.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. And a reminder, if you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat. And if we don't get them all answered here, then we can put them on the Matrix channels and the presenters can answer offline as well. I'm now going to go over to Noel with a question about usability and accessibility. And the question was, are usability, accessibility, inclusivity, and universality a part of Solid? Are they an integral concept? And I'm going to add my own part to the question, which is, how does interoperability support accessibility and inclusivity?
Well, I guess this is like a can of worms. There are many things we could talk about it. But for example, one of the things I think this idea of interoperability is very useful for is for accessibility, because imagine that you are using an application and it covers most of your use cases, but for some reason it's lacking one feature that would make it more accessible for you, you know? The idea with Solid is that you can have another application that implements only this use case, and you can still use both applications. So you wouldn't have this scenario where you have to abandon something completely because it doesn't cover your whole ideas, right? But also something also to understand is that Solid is a protocol. And as I mentioned with the obfuscated interoperability, you can make something that is not accessible using Solid as well. Solid is just a tool and it depends on how you use it. But yeah, that's my idea in general.
Awesome. And a follow-up question for you. We're hearing a lot about LLMs and language models at the moment. If these things can understand our data and I can just put all of my files into an LLM's chat history, do we even need this kind of data modeling and interoperability that you talked about?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think if anything, this idea of shaping data and vocabularies only helps the AI, because if you have everything defined in RDF, it's a lot easier for the LLM to understand it and generate for example, the lens in the example I was saying. But for me, when I say interoperable serendipity, it's not specific to Solid. The ideal scenario actually would be that two people make an application. One is using Solid, somebody else is not using Solid, and the applications work together. That would be the best use case, the best type of interoperable serendipity. So if AI or LLMs help us getting there, for me, that's ideal. But I think we are still really far from that. So all the tools we do can only help us go further. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. We've got a question here from Ariba. This is also to Noel. Does it need to be RDF, or can an application define a spec using JSON and publicize documentations to humans for interoperability?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be RDF, but I actually have a blog post about this. So if you search why Solid and my name, Noel de Martin, you will come across this post. And in that post, I share why I think Solid is the best thing we have right now to make this a reality. So we are still far from this happening, but in my opinion, Solid is the closest thing we have. Because in the end, you could use whatever you want. You can use JSON, XML, you can make your own schema, but the point is that that other people can use it. And for me, Solid is one of the best things we have because, for example, we have different pod providers. So we have different implementations of servers that support the Solid protocol. And I am aware of many other projects, but most of them, they don't have a lot of implementations, or everything has been done by the same company or something. And I like the idea that RDF and Solid build on top of the web. And as I mentioned, for me, the web is one of the best examples of interoperability that we have working for real. So no, it doesn't have to be RDF, but I think it's one of the best things we have right now to make this a reality.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Noel. We're now at time, so I would like to thank everyone for coming to this month's Solid World. As a reminder, if you have any more questions to follow up or you want any more information, please do jump into the Matrix channels and ask those questions there. If you want to get more involved with Solid, that is the place to reach out and ask. You're also welcome to contact the ODI directly, solid@theodi.org, if you want to ask any questions privately as well. Thank you so much for all of today's presenters for their amazing talks. You did an amazing job. Another round of applause to you all. And we will see you all at the next Solid World. Thank you everyone for coming, and bye for now.